Hello, I'm Michelangelo Maglake, a registered psychometrician, and for today we will talk about psychological assessment, the nature and uses of psychological tests. Let's have a short recap from our past lessons. Let's first define a test. So, a test is a standardized procedure for sampling behavior and describing it with categories or scores. Although there are different tests that has different formats and applications, most tests have defining features and characteristics, such as it has standardized procedure, it measures behavior samples, it has scores or categories, it measures the norms or standards, and prediction of non-test behaviors. Now let's also identify the difference between a test and assessment. Well, a test is also different from an assessment. And assessment refers to the entire process of collecting informations about the individuals and subsequently using it to make predictions, while tests represent only one source of information within the assessment process. Well, in psychological testing, a psychological test is a standardized measure of a sample of a person's behavior that is used to measure the individual differences that exist among people. And all psychological tests have one characteristic that makes them both fascinating and remarkably practical. They try to make it possible to find out a great deal about a person in a very short period of time. Well, tests can be useful in predicting how well a person might do in a particular career, in assessing one's individual's desire, interest, and attitudes, and even in revealing psychological problems. And these tests can also show how an individual compares to others. Well, in some cases, tests can be used to predict future behavior, though these are very controversial. And there are also some dangers to testing. And one of these dangers is that we tend to forget that tests are merely tools for measuring and predicting human behavior. In some cases, society starts to think of these tests, such as the IQ test, are the final fact, but nothing could be further from the truth. Now let us discuss the different types of psychometric tests. Well, there are two types of psychological tests that are used by personnel selection practitioners for those who would like to work in industrial settings. And these are the tests of cognitive ability. Well, the test of cognitive ability is a type of a cognitive assessment test which attempt to measure an individual's ability to process information from their environment. We also have the personality test or test of personality measures, where personality measures are more concerned with people's disposition to behave in certain ways and in certain situations. We also have different categories of psychometric tests. And there are three categories of psychometric tests that is used by psychologists. First, we have the normative tests, where most psychometric tests are where data exists, which tell us the range of scores expected from the population under consideration. For example, IQ scores. And then we also have the criterion reference test. These are the tests that is commonly used in education, where a candidate has to meet some pre-arranged standard. We also have these hagiographic tests. Well, tests used in therapy to observe an individual's progress over time. And there are certain applications of personality tests, like criminal psychologists might employ questionnaires to measure impulsivity and its relation to crime. The health psychologist might measure people's optimism in relation to their response to cancer diagnosis. And most of the time, occupational psychologists often employ personality tests to predict job performance and job suitability. So here's an example from Fernham. She reported that workers with high negative affect tend to be less productive and have less job satisfaction. Well, all psychometric tests and psychological tests have to undergo a certain procedure before they become useful in psychological assessment. And one of these procedure is called standardization. Well, tests must be standardized, and standardization refers to two things. First, standardized tests must be administered, and two, scored the same way every time. It means all the time, every time it is conducted, it should be the same, and it should be administered as well. And in this process, we also have to establish norms. Well, once a test result is obtained, the examiner must translate the score into something useful. And suppose you score a 32 out of 50 on a test, what does that score mean? Well, if it is a reliable test, it means that you should be able to understand a certain amount of information on every test, regardless of the way in which it is written. In other words, this score should predict how you will perform at a given level. When psychologists design a test to be used in a variety of settings, they usually set up a scale for comparison by establishing norms. And this is usually done by transforming raw test scores into a percentile system. Now, what is a percentile system? Well, percentile system is a ranking of test scores that indicates the ratio of scores lower and higher than a given score. In other words, you are all ranked from highest to lowest or vice versa. And in order to make comparison, tests are first given to a large number of people in a sample group. Let's say 6th graders of Army privates. And percentiles are then established on the basis of the scores that these people receive. So in other words, tests get harder as more people take them. And these percentiles are called norms. Now the norms are a standard of comparison for test results developed by giving the test to large, well-defined groups of people. And for example, your percentile on an aptitude test such as Scholastic Assessment Test or SAT reflects your standing among people of your age and grade who have taken this exam. Though you should remember that norms are not standards. They merely represent what the majority of a given group will do. Well, one of the things that a good test must possess is test reliability. The ability of a test to give the same results under similar conditions. And there are three basic ways of determining a test reliability. First is the retest reliability. If a person retakes the test or takes a similar test within a short time or a short period of time after the first testing, does he or she receive approximately the same score? Or meaning it may differ in just a few points but not very large gap of points. And then we also have the interscorer reliability. Thus, the test yield the same results when scored at different times by different people. It means it has different people, not the same person, unlike the test retest reliability. And then we also have the split half reliability. It is randomly dividing the test items in half and scoring each half separately. The two scores should be approximately the same, meaning it is only one single test that it has certain items and the items correlate each other, and then it is divided in half. Then you conduct it in one time for in a group of people for in your subjects, and you would compare the scores between the first half to the other half. If it is near, then that means it has reliability. If the points does not differ so much, but if the points differ very much, that means it has less reliability. And another process of the testing is the test validity. Any test may be reliable but still not valid. Take note, any test may be reliable but still not valid. And validity is the ability of a test to measure what it is intended to measure. For example, a test that consists primarily of Spanish vocabulary lists will not measure ability for engineering. It's very far. A history test will not measure general learning ability. Or a test you take in physical education will not measure your ability in math, and so on and so on. Determining the validity of a test is more complex than assessing its reliability. And one of the main methods for measuring validity is to find out how well a test predicts performance. That is predictive validity. For example, a group of psychologists design a test to measure management ability. They ask questions about management systems, attitudes towards employees, and other, of course, relevant information. Will the people who score high on this test really make good managers? What do you think? Well, there are also certain protocols that we need to follow if you would be conducting a psychological test. And controlling the use of psychological tests is one of them. We have to ensure that the test is given by a qualified examiner and that the scores are properly used. It is to prevent general familiarity with the test content, which would invalidate the test. What would you do if you already memorized a test and it was given to you multiple times and in different places and different time? And of course, a qualified examiner should do the following: selection of the test, administration and scoring, and interpretation of scores. The role of a test user, well, you should be able to test scores that are used as sources of information in reaching practical decisions. And some users are the teachers, the counselors, the admins, and even psychometricians and psychologists as well. And we should also consider the security of the test content and communication of test information. Your test should not be placing on any exposed places, considering that you are in a crowded area. It should always be carefully hidden and protected in an archive or in cabinet. And of course, in communicating the test information, you should only relay what it is supposed to be relayed or what is asked, like the referral question. And of course, you also have to take note certain views from test takers' perspective. Well, as a test taker, you would always feel test anxiety. It is a response that was stimulated by ready visibility and its clearly apparent detrimental effects on performance. Well, you feel test anxiety during school achievements and intelligence tests. And school achievements and intelligence test scores yielded significant negative correlations. If you feel bad or are you excited or feeling anxiety in taking the test, you might of course, perform negatively. And it appears likely that the relation between the anxiety and the test performance is non-linear. A large amount of anxiety and is beneficial while large amount is detrimental. Well, there are some times or some cases that as a psychometrician, you might encounter problems with a psychometric test. We have to consider their social desirability. Well, people, when faced with a psychometric test, they feel like they are being judged and so alter their questions or their answers accordingly. And people might engage in social desirability for two reasons. First, self-deception. Well, individuals are overly optimistic in their perceptions of their own positive personality features and play down their perceived negative aspects. And impression managements where individuals try to appear nice because they fear social disapproval. You also have to consider the mood and environmental influence. Well, the mood does seem to play a part in how people go about performing in tests, especially those concerning personality. People in a good mood might answer the questionnaire completely differently than if they were in a bad mood. And features of the environment like the noise, the heat, and the light might also have an impact on our moods and our cognitive abilities. Like Hancock said, Hancock has shown that high temperature has a significant negative effect on vigilance, attention, memory, and reaction time. We also have to consider ecological validity. Well, research that lacks ecological validity focuses on what an individual can do in a research environment instead of what they are usually doing in their everyday lives. If a test is not relevant to an individual's lifestyle, an individual probably will not perform well at it. And this might be due to a lack of motivation or lack of relevant experience with the type of problem set than any lack of intellectual capability. We also have to consider the cultural bias. Well, a contentious issue in the field of psychometric testing is the possibility of bias in such tests against members of ethnic subgroups of the population. For example, newly arrived immigrants will have difficulty with an intelligence test which asks them to name past leaders of the country to which they have recently immigrated. At the present time, most standardized psychometric tests are based on Western definition and Western cultural practices. Well, if you would ask, are there culture-free tests? Yes, of course there are. Attempts have been made to develop culture-free tests of intelligence, but on the whole, these attempts have not been successful. This is due to several factors. Well, conceptions of intelligence vary widely from culture to culture, and even if the content of a test can be made culture-free, culture itself will still affect the results through directing attitudes towards tests, test taking, competition, and so on. But we also have certain examples of relatively culture-free psychometric tests. And maybe one of these tests, you already have one of these tests. Yeah. And this is the later International Performance Scale, the LIPS, revised by Royd and Miller in the year 1997. And it covers four domains of functioning: reasoning, visualization, and attention and memory. And the other one is the Ravens Progressive Matrices by Court and Ravens in 1995, which covers general cognitive ability. Both of these tests are untimed and can be administered using virtually no language at all. I think that's everything that we have to discuss about this topic. And thank you for watching. I hope you would subscribe for more lecture video presentations. Thank you everyone and God bless.